Okay. Thanks a lot. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's research seminar entitled Contemporary Research in Entrepreneurship, Education and Law. My name is Rita Klapper and I work for the Strategy, Environment and Sustainability Department at Manchester Metropolitan University. So we have some really interesting speakers today. After a short introduction about some research in the area of sustainable enterprise education that I've been involved in, with Amparo Merino from Madrid. We'll talk about her research, followed by Eva Kasparova, who works now for Aston University. And then basically at the end, we've got Dr. Jorge Núñez, our colleague from the law school, talk about his research in the area of conflict and territories. So basically, the idea is that everybody has got 1 or 2 minutes just to introduce themselves, who they are. And then basically, they've got about 15 to 20 minutes to present their research. And hopefully, there's a little bit time left for Q&As at the end. A bit of the agenda of what we're going to do today. So after my welcome, the motivation for this event, but it is basically normally a monthly event to have these research seminars in our department, but also these are still COVID times, second wave COVID. And basically, it's also a little bit about bringing a community together that is interested and still trying to do research in these demanding times. A bit about housekeeping follows, disclaimer and an overview of the event. I do this quite quickly. Please, all Zoom attendees should be muted during the Q&A. And of course, basically use the chat box if you have questions. You can disable your video connection if and basically hello?
Yeah, is it right, Rita?
Yeah, it's okay. It's just somebody was trying to ring, but I didn't see who it was. But anyway, so Zoom attendees may remain anonymous, as I said. Okay, a little disclaimer here. Basically, nothing really out of the ordinary. It's just nice for everybody to be respectful and professional to our hosts, to the guest speakers and attendees. Basically, it's also about confidentiality. We are recording this session. If somebody is against this, please let us know for whatever reasons these are. But basically, it's important that you understand that this is what is happening. Basically, the views and opinions expressed in the event are those of each participant and not necessarily that of the organizer or even any universities or any other organizations. Okay, so a disclaimer is important here. Participants may not, under any circumstance, use any type of recording devices, video, audio, or otherwise to capture the information provided at the event. No recording devices, photography, or videography is allowed. By participating in the event, every participant understands that portions of the event may be recorded in video and audio and or captured in still and or digital photographs by the organizer. The organizers owns all rights of any audio, video and or photograph captured during the event. So please take the time, if you're interested, of course, to read through all these different aspects, which were kindly provided by Jorge. So an overview of the event. I quickly basically talk about some interesting findings from an event that I organized on the 8th of July with a very international cohort, where I brought actually basically participants together from companies, academics, and also postgraduate learners and startups. And I'll talk about that a little bit, followed by Amparo, who talks about nature relatedness and character strength. A recent article and research she and colleagues in Spain have conducted. Eva's topic is the welfare state, a facilitator or inhibitor of inclusive entrepreneurship. And Jorge is going to talk about a multi-dimensional response to crisis, the case of territorial dispute. And I'm aware that there's another meeting following at 4 p.m. So we have to wrap up on time. So a little bit about head, hands, and heart in sustainable enterprise education. So this is evidence from a practice-based event, as I said. What am I going to talk about? I give you a little bit more background to what actually happened, the theory, my findings, and conclusions. So basically, as I said, I conducted an international online event at the beginning of July on the 8th, where I brought different audiences together. First, we had, and also Amparo, the second speaker, she was involved in this event. And we basically had 2 academic panels investigating how entrepreneurship and sustainability are combined in education, or maybe not actually at this moment in time, and how we could, and basically speakers from different countries were talking about their experience. Then the third element of this international webinar was basically bringing different people from different walks of life, like SMEs, international academics, and startups and learners around a round table, and basically on the basis of SIPSO's head and heart model, make them reflect on what should actually go into an education, into a sustainable enterprise education. Now, we've got here on our slide the head, hands, and heart model, for those who are not familiar with it. The head is about the cognitive dimension, the what should we teach? The hands, the psychomotor, how should we teach it? The heart, the affection, the why. And I combine this for a long time. My ambition has been to teach certain subjects like entrepreneurship, sustainability, leadership. My ambition has been to teach it in a way that basically the learner is aiming, well, is getting into the leader's head, is getting into the entrepreneur's head. It's about thinking, promoting thinking from within, or witness thinking rather than aboutness thinking. So my ambition has been not to teach about entrepreneurship, about sustainable enterprise, sustainable entrepreneurship, but rather basically get learners to think from within, make them understand the within approach. This is clearly quite challenging, and it takes some thinking about how you're going to do this. So basically, the event at the beginning of July was a good moment to ask basically the participating parties. And here on my next slide, you can see who was there. Thierry Roussin, who is based in Paris, who runs his own business, working in sustainable enterprise. Les Owens, running an SME in the UK. Debbie Kirsch, a postgraduate learner from Utrecht and also an entrepreneur. Oliver, a postgraduate student. Teresa, a postgraduate student at Leuphana University, studying sustainability. Lindsay Berg, a consultant in Gothenburg in Sweden. Seb Carney, a consultant in the UK, a climate change specialist. Mark Fitzenmeier, a senior analyst at the only German sustainability bank, and Jorge from the law school at MMU, and of course Monica from EcoAlf in Spain. So, and basically what we can see here, different people from very different backgrounds came together, and I presented them with a challenging task. What should we teach in the heads category at the crossroads of enterprise and sustainability to startups, small business and SMEs? How should we teach the hands approach? How can we engage the heart in these programs that we are creating at the interface between enterprise and sustainability? How can we involve the learners with their emotions and their motivations? How can we consider the needs of the enterprise, the academics, and the learners within this context of sustainable enterprise education? And basically what you see here at the moment is the outcome. So whilst we were having this discussion, basically we found that it was very important for the discussants that in this area of head, that we integrated systems thinking, sustainable value creation, sustainability, communication. And that we had ethical discussions and values that we also needed to integrate into our classes. Just a second, I need to, I have some people who cannot enter apparently, so please bear with me and I'll come back to this slide here in a second. Well, so unfortunately, I don't know why people cannot enter. It may be an issue that I cannot resolve. Okay, so basically, as I mentioned before, in the head dimension, the participants of the workshop were particularly interested in integrating systems thinking, discussions about sustainable value creation and sustainability communication. Ethics and values were also an important topic. Also the loss of biodiversity, planetary boundaries, circular economy, and sustainable leadership. It was important.
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, Rita. I was on the other meeting room and Ava and Sally are both in the other meeting room because they didn't have the link for this one.
But I sent them out separately. I've just admitted Ava. Has she not?
Oh, okay.
Ava not in?
I shared the link with her, so hopefully it's worked for her.
Yeah,
then.
I hope so too. Yeah. I sent it separately to Ava again because I mean it kept bouncing back from her Aston email. I sent it to her private Gmail address.
Oh. Hopefully she's got access then now. I'll send it to Sally as well, just in case.
Please, yeah. Yes. Okay. I hope these colleagues can join in now. Okay, coming back to the head dimension and what the participants in the workshop mentioned. Basically, there is a need to consider the perspective of students, that they require some personal reflection about the value of certain theories in their daily lives. Working with companies, the companies at the workshop felt that there is a need for them to understand what certain theories could do to them and how maybe they could impact, knowing these theories could impact positively on their performance. Okay. So basically, it's about winning over the head dimension, engaging the head dimension, whether it's the learners, whether it's the startups, whether it's the companies. But we also need to be realistic. It was mentioned in particular by the postgraduate learners that more and more students need increased help to make sense out of classes, sense out of the theories that we teach. Okay. It was also mentioned by the participants that it is necessary to teach facts, but connect them to the heart. So involve the community, involve the environment in which basically educational establishments are based, where the education is happening. There's also a need to connect head and heart through systems thinking. So we have some overlap here between the different dimensions in order to create a positive impact, and also in order to create this sense of purpose that then can be aligned with behavioral change. Somebody also actually pointed out that there is a need to engage in reflective discussions about elites and hierarchies. Moving on to heart, basically it was important, many participants in the workshop felt that the heart needs to come first in our education, and that education should be developed around the heart. And that there is a need for students and probably staff to understand one's own values first. There's a need for more reflection. Many participants mentioned that. There is a need to engage with the emotions, the leader, the entrepreneur. They have passions. And that's why actually we listen to them. So basically in the education we provide, we need to let the learners experience this passion. In terms of hands, the participants talked in particular about creating impact, showing evidence. There was a need to teach how sustainability can be good for the business. There's a need to feel engaged. There's this need to feel empowered as learners. That was very, very important. And also, people talked about courage, encouraging learners that they're brave enough to follow. But there also is a recognition that not the loudest voice is always the one that is right. I speed up a little bit because I'm very conscious she has another class. What was said in relation to head, hands, and heart was don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. So that there was a need for our education to reflect this this bottom-up change. That there's a need to bring change into the institutions, maybe even provoke change. And then there's a need for learners and educators to understand themselves and their motivations. And obviously, a lot is driven by this idea or the question of meaningfulness. And that should be given some consideration when we're creating educational programs at the interface between sustainability and enterprise. I just wanted to give very quickly 2 examples of what I've been experimenting with again in my own education. So in a Pearson online program in which I'm teaching leadership and change management, I've been teaching about emotions, and I have been connecting this to leaders who use emotions in their discourse. That's one example. Another example is where I've been bringing in sense making through art. I've worked with creative arts before, and I've basically, it's of course all online. I've been I've been using art, paintings, to stimulate discussion and create sense making. Some of these are my own paintings, not that I painted them, but I acquired them. Some belong to a former French colleague of mine, Joël E, with who I worked in the classroom also. So these are basically some ideas where I've used creative arts to engage the learners. Now, quickly, implications for practice. Yes, there is a need to engage head, hands, and heart in our educational programs through problem-based learning, through experiential learning, through engaged scholarship, for instance. There's consensus when we talk to colleagues about this. However, we are challenged to reflect this in our teaching. In particular, COVID has probably taught us that there is a need to consider feelings, passions, courage, and dislikes of the learners and in our teaching. And the question is of how best to use and engage with these. There's also a need to involve multiple stakeholders in our programs, in our course creations, and bring them into the classroom. Implications for research, well, basically conducting evaluative research, pre and post course analysis to see what works. I've been involved with one of the workshop and participants in an assessment of a learning journey financed by the European Institute for Innovation and Technology in the area of sustainable enterprise. So there's much more room to conduct this kind of assessment of learning journeys. So that's it for me. Sorry for these interruptions. Amparo, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. If there are any questions, because I'm very conscious Amparo has to move on. If there are any questions about my presentation, please ask them at the end or send me an email. I hope this is okay for everybody. I hope everybody's entered now the space after initial issues. Eva is here with us, is that right?
Yes, hi Rita. Hello everybody. I think that Sally is probably still using the other link. So I joined maybe 5 minutes ago, and I was in a different room with Sally Vandals. So maybe she needs a link to get to this room.
Okay, so maybe she has not. Okay, I'll let Amparo basically take over the screen. Okay, and I will send another link to Sally.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'm just, can you see, let's see now. Oh. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Shall I stop sharing on my side? Yeah.
Maybe now? Can
yes.
You see it now?
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Rita, very much for your invitation. Very pleased to be sharing this research directly connected to what Rita has just said, and evidence of the relevance of looking into education from hearts, heads, and hands. So I'm very sorry that I have to rush. at your 3 because I have classes. So I will try to go quickly to the point. Well, but I wouldn't I would like to pass the opportunity to show you our building. I would like to say to you that you all are invited to come, but now is some kind of difficult, sadly. But here we are at the Universidad Pontificia Comillas at Madrid. I belong to the Department of Management, and this presentation pretends to share with you the main findings of our research project that try to explore the connections between these two constructs, nature relatedness and character strengths, within the field of environmental education. This is where it emerged. This is part of a very recently published article together with my colleagues, Carmen Valor and Raquel Redondo. Raquel is our modeler. She's the expert in quantitative methods. And so I'm going to focus mainly on the rationale of the work and main findings. If you are interested in very specific details of the methods of our study, I will be happy to connect you with Raquel. So first, why we decided to put these two constructs in dialogue. It's related with well, nature relatedness is a construct that tries to explain our human interdependence with nature, and many other definitions of our interdependence have been used in environmental education and in other fields. But I will explain you in a minute why we chose this and what it means if you're not familiar with it. So maybe an image that is worth more than 1,000 words, we say in Spanish. If you see this image of a natural environment, and after that this image, maybe some emotions emerge on you, and maybe thoughts on the desire to do something, judgment about what is happening. This is related to our natural connection with nature. This has been stated in the biophilia hypothesis that defends this very human desire to relate to the natural environment. But there is still a wide variability in the extent to which individuals are drawn to nature. Some people feel very positively and strongly related to nature, while others are not so moved. So mainly in environmental psychology, has been the nature relatedness has been defined as individual differences in cognitive, affective, and experiential connections with the natural environment, encompassing 3 dimensions. Many other notions refer to the emotional appealing to nature, of the cognition about nature, maybe literacy about nature, of the experience of joy or love for nature. But this construct is interesting, widely used and widely used in studies in environmental psychology, just to express these different dimensions that are related to our interconnectedness with nature. If you're interested, the work by Nisbet and her colleagues is quite extensive. They have measured this construct, and we used this measure for performing our study. So these 3 dimensions refer to the self. One of the dimensions is the self, nature as part of our identity. This is measured with through questions such as this one. My relationship to nature is an important part of who I am, for example. Or the perspective dimensions relates to our desire to act in relations to the human actions and their impact on human nature and all living things in general. And the third experience dimension refers to what we feel in nature, our familiarity, and the type of comfort we feel when we are in nature. For example, I enjoy being outdoors even in unpleasant weather. This type of questions are part of the questionnaire that these authors created, that, and as I mentioned, has been widely used to understand how we connect to nature in these three dimensions, and to relate this construct with other variables such as pro-environmental behavior. Because of this, nature relatedness or increasing or nurturing nature relatedness has been a goal in environmental education in general. Because even though nature relatedness is we could say it's a trait because it's stable over time, but even though it's malleable, it's not completely fixed, so we can nurture in educational contexts. So this is why researchers in environmental education are interested in it, and the demand for more research is growing. It is very dominant, the idea of the cultivation of our sense of interconnectedness with nature through exposure to nature. This is common sense, and it's been demonstrated through multitude of studies. However, exposure to nature is not always easy in course design, even maybe sometimes it's challenging, especially in higher education, on specific studies such as business, for example. So there is interest in trying to see, to explore other factors, other variables that might contribute to develop nature relatedness, and so open new ways to cultivate it and nurture it in classroom, informal or informal settings, and on different levels of education. So why we focused on character strengths? Well, there is a clear antecedent in the environmental virtue ethics tradition. Because environmental virtues would be character traits that promote human and non-human flourishing. Virtues is related to human flourishing, but environmental virtues opens the scope to refer to the recognition of value in natural goods. And virtuous, environmental virtuous individuals would respond to these natural goods in a virtuous way. So for example, environmental virtue have developed several new virtues, like virtue of harmony with nature, or virtue of acknowledgement of acknowledged dependence. So what is character strength? This construct, though, has even character strength. They have a long tradition in virtue, in virtue in general, but in positive psychology, was developed to try to look for an optimal human evolution. The seminal work by Peterson and Seligman defined character strengths as dispositions towards thinking, feeling, and acting towards a moral goal. It's a kind of would be like the psychological roots in which virtues are displayed. These authors created a set of 24 character strengths, drawing from hundreds of texts from different cultures, traditions, and history. And they measured these character strengths, creating an instrument, a questionnaire, the values in action inventory of strengths via action. It's quite famous. Maybe you're familiar with that. because it's been used and replicated in many studies, cross-culturally, cross-generations, and is translated into a lot of languages. If you're interested, take note of the web page where the VIA Character Institute is. So you can the questionnaires are open in different languages and are different versions also. Short versions are versions for young people, version for adults, and all the rationale behind the questionnaire. So these 24 character strengths are widely accepted, but the latent factor structure is more controversial. There is not agreement, and even though the original factor, the way the authors grouped all the character strengths were not validated in studies later, studies that were performed later. So one of the most accepted way to group the 24 character strengths is the one by McGrath that grouped them into 5 categories of strengths: interpersonal, emotional, related to restraint, spiritual, and intellectual. So we use this structure to the further discussion. We used it, and so we ourselves perform a factorial analysis as I'm going to tell you right now. So considering these antecedents of the relationship between these two constructs, we perform several analyses to give evidence of that. So our 2 research questions were like these ones. Is there an empirical association between character strengths and natural relatedness? And which of the character strengths, the 24, best discriminate between individuals with high and low nature relatedness? As I mentioned, we had an antecedent of the connection, but I offer you some additional justification. Both literature has showed that both constructs offer similar outcomes. For example, natural relatedness and character strengths have been proved to be antecedents of well-being or pro-environmental behavior, and are correlated with similar constructs. For example, mindfulness as a trait is correlated with our 2 constructs. So if they give similar outcomes, it is plausible to think that there could be covariation among them. In addition, they both reflect an interdependent construal of ourselves. And in addition, past studies have associated natural relatedness with a specific character strengths such as generosity or restraint. So from these assumptions and previous ideas, we perform we carry out questionnaires to nearly 1,000 students in our university belonging to the faculties of law, management, and engineering. They answered an 80-item questionnaires that included a short version of the VIA questionnaire I mentioned before, and a short version also of the nature relatedness scale. We use the short one because previous studies showed similar results, and because the questionnaire was quite long in itself. We added some demographical and control variable questions related to demographic aspects of the students, mainly gender, age, and the faculty they belong to. And we performed 3 analyses that I'm going to explain you right now. As I mentioned, as the factorial structure is controversial, we did a factorial analysis, exploratory, and we find that quite very similar result to the McGrath's model. Maybe curiosity or creativity belong to a different group, but they were really similar. So we kept these factors to study the relationship between the factors and nature relatedness. We found that every single character strength was significantly and positively related to nature relatedness. And when we collapsed the characters' strengths into their 5 groups, we found that except for emotional strengths, all of them were correlated positively. The strongest association took place with intellectual strengths, love of learning, curiosity, appreciation of beauty, and creativity. Quite similar to the association of individual character strengths. Our second research question related to the discriminatory power of character strengths showed us that appreciation of beauty has had a central role in a way that those individuals who scored high or low in appreciation of beauty had a higher probability to score high or low in nature relatedness. Creativity, love of learning, and zest also showed a capacity to predict higher or low levels of nature relatedness. So, what kind of implications we found from these results? Well, a general implication is related with the controversy of educating character. I don't know if you're familiar with these discussions, but character education is contested because of the neutrality of education, supposedly neutrality of education, or even because of the complexity of training character. 24 character strengths is quite a lot to work on all of them. I forgot to mention that one of the reasons why it's interesting, the analysis we performed, is because of all of the character strengths are correlated among them. This is coherent with the doctrine of the unity of virtues that are underlying character strengths, in a way that good character would be composed of very different virtues together, creating a good character. So all of them are holistically related in a kind of gestalt, and nature relatedness would be part of this gestalt. This is what our results say. So if taking into account all these relationships makes complex and controversial educating character, things could be easier if we focus on what we can call signature strengths, a group of strengths that facilitates the development of nature relatedness. Our dominant character strengths, creativity, love of learning, zest, and appreciation of beauty, above all of them are related with this process of ego transcendence and expansion of our own ego that encompasses other human beings, human livings, and the nature as a whole. So it's a coherent explanation. So if we can focus on a limited set of character strengths, the signature, it makes easier to define educational activities, to design syllabus, monitor progress, to measure and monitoring progress, and facilitate agreements towards which values to bring into our classrooms. Apart from this, we have clearly seen that one character's strength stands out among others, as Rita knows well because of her work with arts, with her students. Appreciation of beauty it has shown to be very, very central and very relevant. So appreciation of beauty, following the definition of Peterson and Seligman, the ability to find, recognize, and take pleasure in the existence of goodness in the physical and social worlds. Beauty is everywhere. Beauty is in nature, in arts, in moral beauty also, and ideas, philosophical or mathematical ideas. We can recognize and appreciate beauty in very different fields and from very different foci. And beauty, above all, is accessible to all. Maybe exposition to nature is not so much, but beauty it is. So appreciation of beauty can be exercised through web-based exercise, through service learning activities, in every single discipline, course level. So our results they are pointing to the opportunity for further research and practice of appreciation of beauty. So I encourage you to research on it and to practice it. And well, maybe our results also tell us about the opportunity to fight what Howell, Disney, and Robinson called the tragedy of beauty. So the decline in Western cultures to recognize beauty as a central part of human flourishing. So thank you very much. I'm sorry because I have taken more time than I would like. But I'm at you can find me by email or through Rita, and we can take dialogues on that. So I'm going to stop my screen. If you have a very quick question, I will be happy to answer, because I'm seeing that is only 5 minutes left for my next class. So if you have a quick comment or question, I will be happy to hear it.
Basically, first of all, Amparo, many thanks for this really inspiring presentation. And I was really intrigued to learn about the link between nature relatedness and character strength, and the theories that you employed in this research. And I just hear, I see that Paul Upham is asking Amparo, what is actually beauty? I don't know.
Yeah,
you can
yeah. I guess there is a lot of definition. Is very narrow or very broad. Yeah, if we use the definition by Peterson and Seligman as they defined appreciation of beauty, they relate beauty to the existence of goodness in physical and social worlds, they say. But beauty is recognized also to be in moral or in ideas. So arts, nature are typical worlds where the appreciation of goodness can be taking pleasure of the existence of goodness in it is what can be referred as beauty. But yeah, I encourage you, Paul, to look for other definitions, because yeah, of course, it's not a universal or definite one.
Very interesting, Amparo. I mean, the challenge for us then basically work in education is to sort of bring your findings into into courses and programs, isn't it? And also some of us work with companies, and I know that I ran an executive postgraduate seminar some years ago, actually at a professional school in Germany, and I took the students out into the garden. They had to take off their shoes, and we did a mindfulness walking exercise. And the exercises, the weather was great. But I mean, it may be something like this. I was thinking maybe that creates nature relatedness. And I mean, it's just one idea. I mean, how would you create nature relatedness, Amparo?
Create in the classroom, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, yeah, that's why it's interesting to look for complementary ways to increase our relationship with nature. Well, there are evidence that even seeing pictures of nature can nurture our feeling of connection. But yes, the most effective way to increase it is by being exposed to nature. Anyway, if as well as beauty can be a very fuzzy notion, something similar with nature. We don't necessarily need to associate nature with wildness, but even the urban park may be a place to experience with nature, cultivating in plants in a urban urban place. So, well, yes, just here an insight to keep on exploring.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so thank you very much. I'm sorry because of my English, because I'm more used to reading and writing and less to speaking. So sorry because of my.
It's really very interesting.
Okay, so we can keep on conversating on nature and beauty and ways to put it into practice in the classroom. I think that there are many opportunities, and to cooperate with other colleagues from other faculties. Well, this is the first step. So let's keep on moving on it.
That's great. So thanks a lot, Amparo, for basically sharing this with us. And this was really nice, and also to hear about your experiences at the very beginning from Spain and COVID. That was lovely. And well, thanks a lot, and keep safe and healthy and motivated, of course.
Thank you to you and the rest of the audience. Enjoy the rest of the seminar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Amparo. So our next speaker is now Eva. Eva, are you there?
I'm here.
Are you host?
I should be. I think I'm able. Yes, I'm able to share the screen. So I'll just upload I'll share my slides with you in a minute. Can everyone see this?
Okay. Yes, it's coming on. Yeah, looking great.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Rita, for inviting me to present at your seminar. It feels good to be back in touch with MMU, and really good as well, because this study that I'm going to talk about has been funded by Manchester Metropolitan University, and I'd like to say thanks for funding this research, and also say thank you to the study participants for taking part to share their stories. So I'm going to talk about some initial findings from this pilot project that I conducted last year, looking at the impact of welfare reforms on disabled entrepreneurs. And just to give you a bit of a background, the idea for this project started with basically me doing, I've been doing research on inclusive entrepreneurship over the past 10 years, focusing specifically on disabled entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs with long-term health conditions. And one of the participants from my doctoral research got in touch with me and basically suggested, to have a look at how welfare reforms have impacted on disabled self-employed people in the UK. And so, as I said, the study was conducted in 2019, and the specific aim was to look at how changes to in-work and disability-related support and benefits have impacted on disabled entrepreneurs' well-being, working practices, and business performance. And because I was looking at this issue of welfare reform impact through the lens of inclusive enterprise policy, my main research question became, is welfare state a facilitator or inhibitor of inclusive entrepreneurship, or where all have opportunities to start and manage a business? So to put this into context, there has been a steady increase in welfare spending in the UK over the past 30 years, both in cash and real terms. We have seen the impact of the global financial crisis, and then the government's efforts to reduce public debt by initiating various public spending cuts and welfare reforms. And one of the key targets of the welfare reforms has been to try and reduce the costs of incapacity and disability benefits, while at the same time tightening eligibility criteria for the new benefit claimants. We've seen government commitment to try and halve the disability employment gap, which stood at about 32% in 2017. So the disability employment gap is the difference in employment rate between disabled and non-disabled people. And there is now growing evidence that welfare reforms have had a negative impact on disabled people and on their opportunities and living standards. We also know that from some studies that welfare changes to the welfare support in the UK have had little influence, or to the welfare system have had little influence on the levels of worklessness and on disabled people's transition into paid work. And so from my initial review of the literature, I found that the relationship between welfare support and entrepreneurial behavior is relatively underexplored. And I've identified three kind of main areas of research there. First, there is a concern with this kind of differential access to social protection between employees and the self-employed. And this is particularly important given that there are increasing levels of low-paid, insecure, and precarious self-employment. And it's even more important now in the times of coronavirus, when so many self-employed are, relying on some kind of support from the state in order to get through the crisis and to survive the crisis. The second area of research I identify is studies that look at the role of welfare support in entrepreneurship and in motivating entrepreneurship. And there are some studies that suggest that welfare system can be both an incentive, but also potentially a disincentive to entrepreneurship. So just to give you an example, the so-called welfare bridge schemes were found to be successful in facilitating a transition from unemployment to self-employment by providing some income support to people who are setting up their business for a short period of time. And so there is this interest in among policymakers in how entrepreneurship can be a way of reducing unemployment and reducing welfare dependency. And the final point to make about the existing literature is that there's some studies that look at this issue of welfare, of benefits trap, or fear of losing regular benefit income in transition to self-employment. And this issue of benefits trap is seen as a major barrier for aspiring disabled entrepreneurs. So overall, when looking at the literature, there are a number of knowledge gaps. First, we know very little about how changes or interruptions to welfare support affect self-employed people, and particularly self-employed people who are vulnerable or disadvantaged. And secondly, we know little about how important welfare support is to disabled entrepreneurs and how well the current welfare system actually supports this group. And so how can we make sense of the impact of welfare reforms on disabled entrepreneurs, and how does this relate to enterprise policy? My starting point is to define enterprise policy, to adopt a broad view of enterprise policy as any government action that shapes the development of entrepreneurship rather than directly targeting it. And so from this broader viewpoint, one can see a welfare state as a key institution in the wider enterprise policy framework and in the design of inclusive enterprise policy. So traditionally, a welfare state is defined as a kind of government that provides social protection to vulnerable groups, but more recently, some have defined it as a form of social investment. And disabled people we know that disabled people face particular disadvantages in the labor market, for example, discrimination and harassment in the workplace. And we also know that for many, entrepreneurship is a key route into work, if not the only route. However, disabled entrepreneurs experience additional barriers in starting and running a business compared to non-disabled entrepreneurs. For example, inaccessible transport, premises, inaccessible information and support. They also face additional risks and uncertainty associated with both self-employment and disability. So, for example, if you're someone who has a long-term fluctuating health condition, your working hours and your work pattern can be quite unpredictable or irregular, and therefore your income is unpredictable and irregular. And so given these barriers, welfare support can really help address some of these barriers and some of these uncertainties that disabled entrepreneurs face, and potentially create a level playing field with non-disabled competitors. Now, in contrast, reduced, interrupted, or withdrawn support can have adverse impact on disabled entrepreneurs. So as I said, this is my presentation builds on a small pilot study they conducted last year, and I spoke to 7 disabled entrepreneurs. But for this is actually work in progress, and I drafted a conference paper. And for the conference paper, I decided to focus on 3 case study entrepreneurs who were all kind of established rather than startup businesses, and who all reported facing particular difficulties because of the changes to their welfare support. So in my analysis, I focus on a number of reforms, and I'll just mention them briefly. So first, there were a number of changes to access to work scheme, which is a scheme that offers both practical and financial support to people who face disability-related barriers to work. The second reform that I focused on was the introduction of personal independence payment, which replaced disability living allowance. And both PIP and DLA are financial benefits that cover the extra costs that are given to people to cover the extra costs of disability. And the final reform I looked at was the introduction of universal credit, which replaced 6 other benefits, including working tax credit. And without going into too much detail, the key point I'd like to make is that all of these changes have led to a reduced level of support for some disabled entrepreneurs, and also to stricter criteria stricter kind of eligibility criteria for accessing these benefits for both existing as well as new claimants. And with some of the key characteristics of the 3 entrepreneurs that I spoke to, their personal and business characteristics, but also if you look at the column on the right, the last column, that gives an overview of the key changes to the welfare support. So as you can see, some of them have had their access to work reduced. One of them had lost their personal independence payment, and another change was a transition from working tax credit to universal credit, which is also affected this entrepreneur. And so moving on to findings, I'd like to talk about 3 main themes or findings from our analysis. First, I wanted to know how important welfare support is to disabled entrepreneurs. And I'd like to start by, I think, highlighting that disabled entrepreneurs are a very diverse group in terms of impairment type, severity, onset, as well as other characteristics. And the different impairment types and these different characteristics can really affect individual working practices in different ways. So just to give you an example, Deborah, who has a visual impairment, she can typically work full-time with the help from a support worker, unlike Ruth and Emma, who both have chronic health conditions that affect their ability to work, and they both work on average about 20 hours a week. And so what I found through this is that welfare support schemes work, PIP and working tax credit, can really help address some of these impairment effects, as well as the wider barriers that disabled entrepreneurs experience, by providing essential in-work support. So, for example, Access to Work can offer funding to cover the cost of a support worker, or it can pay for assistive technology or communication support. PIP, or personal independence payment, covers the extra costs of disability, and this is important for many disabled entrepreneurs who use PIP, for example, to get a specially adjusted car to help them get around, to go out and meet clients, where maybe public transport is not very accessible for them. And finally, welfare support is really important for many in terms of topping up low income. So many disabled entrepreneurs have limited capacity to work, and many of them will work maybe only part-time, or they will have irregular work hours. And the quotation there from Ruth illustrates really how insecure self-employment can be for someone who has a long-term fluctuating health condition, and therefore how important welfare support is for some disabled entrepreneurs. So the second key finding I'd like to highlight is that there was this, when I talked to these entrepreneurs, there was this strong sense of injustice or unfairness because of the changes to their welfare support, whether this was reduction, temporary interruption, or a complete termination of support that they received previously. And each of the three participants told me that they had taken some kind of action to try and revert the decision that was taken by DWP to change their support. So some of them have taken some of them have appealed against the decision through mandatory reconsideration, or have taken it to tribunal, and some of them have even taken political action. So just to give you an example again, Emma, who had her access to work temporarily reduced, she was trying to resolve this issue with access to work and to negotiate. And when she wasn't getting anywhere with it, she got in touch with her MP, who helped her write a letter. And in the end, she managed to get her access to work to the same level as it was previously. And again, a quotation there from Deborah illustrates how frustrated she was with access to work when they decided to reduce her level of support. And this was after many years of having the same level of support and running her business with having a support worker full time. And so finally, what was the impact of welfare reforms on these entrepreneurs, on their businesses, on their working practices, and on their well-being? What I found was that for some of these entrepreneurs, reduced welfare support meant reduced work hours. So Emma, again, I'll give you an example of Emma. When she had her access to work reduced, she was basically left for 3 months without having any support, which meant that she also had to work less hours. Now, in the case of Deborah, she was in a long-term, several years of dispute that she had with access to work, and during all this time, she didn't have any support, which meant that she eventually had to close her business. But what is also interesting is that Deborah, she tried to kind of sustain her business during this time, which didn't have any support. And she really, in order to kind of pay for a support worker, she needed to use cash reserves from her business that she accumulated over the years. But that then impacted on her ability to, because she wasn't sure about whether she would have any support from access to work in future, that really impacted on her ability to bid for contracts and also to be competitive, because she was potentially looking at the possibility of having to fund her own support worker in future. And so for both Emma and Deborah, they both experienced a significant reduction in their income, whether this was from trading benefits or from both. So Emma, for example, when she lost her personal independence payment, she also lost various other benefits, including working tax credit. And this meant that her disposable income was really reduced quite significantly from about £600 a month to £50 a month. And what that meant in practice for Emma is that she needed, because she lost all this benefit income, she needed to increase her income from trading. But as I mentioned earlier, because Emma can only work on average 20 hours a week, she really needed to employ other people to do the work on her behalf, or to do the work. And so this is an interesting one, because although Emma told me that she was able to increase somewhat, she was able to increase her income, she also told me how anxious she was about trying to sustain her business at that level, while also trying to balance work and the effects of her health condition. And so overall, it is clear from my analysis that welfare reforms have had a negative impact on these entrepreneurs' standard of living and on their well-being. All of the participants told me how stressed they were, not only because they experienced these changes to their support, reduction to their support, but also they were really stressed because of the whole process of trying to negotiate and being in dispute with the authorities. One of them told me that she felt a lot more isolated since losing some of these benefits. So Emma, for example, when she lost PIP, she was not able to go out and socialize as much as she was previously, and she also was not able to pay for some of the treatments that she had previously, such as physiotherapy, which in turn affected her physical well-being. There was also a lot of anxiety because of the benefits assessment process and fear of losing benefits, fear of losing support. And finally, there was a lot of frustration, particularly from Ruth and Emma, who both have kind of less visible or hidden impairments or health conditions. And they both kind of told me about how the professionals or the authorities, they didn't really understand disability, and they didn't really want to believe them that they had those specific needs. And this was really frustrating for them. So there seems to be this kind of, so the welfare reforms seem to be impacting particularly on people who have kind of less visible impairments or health conditions. And to conclude, I'd like to go back to my original research question: is welfare state a facilitator or inhibitor of inclusive entrepreneurship? My study, although quite small, I think it illustrates how important welfare support is for disabled entrepreneurs and for their ability to work and to sustain their business. It has also shown that the recent welfare reforms have had a negative impact on these entrepreneurs, on their businesses, on their working practices, as well as on their well-being. And I'd like to end my presentation with a couple of policy implications. I think what comes out of my analysis is that there appears to be a contradiction in policy, in that on one hand, the government claims that they're trying to reduce the disability employment gap and to support disabled people into work. But at the same time, we have seen a significant reduction in disability and in-work support for disabled entrepreneurs. And the second implication is more of a question regarding whether we need to maybe think differently about this notion of welfare dependency or long-term reliance on welfare support, and really rethink this negative perception of welfare dependency, considering that so many disabled people, whether it's employees or self-employed, depend on long-term welfare support in order to enter and to remain in work. I'd like to also make a few suggestions for future research. So we don't know what the scale of welfare reform impact is on disabled entrepreneurs across the UK. We've got some insights from this small study, but how has these reforms impacted on disabled entrepreneurs on a larger scale is unknown. And secondly, I think there is a poor understanding in the literature of the complexity of disability and the relationship between disability, self-employment, and welfare support. And so I would invite future research to look at the importance of welfare support to disabled entrepreneurs and how well the current system supports this group. Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eva. This has been very, very interesting. I mean, it's quite, I mean, we'll see what the other participants think, but I found it quite amazing how your research also touched upon this emotions dimension, which you brought out in, yeah, the feelings that the participants experience as a result of the changes in the welfare provision. And I really found this absolutely fascinating. And one of the ideas I thought was also like, I wanted to ask you, you said we have to rethink the perception, the negative perception of welfare dependency. Because I've researched the perception of different learners and people of different concepts over the years, because I want to get into the head and find out what is sort of more the cognitive dimension of all of this. No, I mean, did you actually ask them in the study about more precisely what is welfare dependency for you? Did you ask them to define this?
I didn't, but I did ask people about. Thank you, Rita. It's an excellent question. I did ask them about basically the assumptions that there are in the literature about how welfare support traps people on low income, and people had views on it. And I can't remember everything now because it's still an initial analysis. But no, I didn't ask them specifically about welfare dependency. But I think it's really important to, that question about do we need to rethink it, because it's not only disabled people, but it's single mothers and it's many other groups in society that are dependent on welfare support. And really there is this negative perception, even in the inclusive enterprise policy. So if you look at inclusive enterprise policy, literature, people talk about disadvantaged groups of entrepreneurs, and they talk about how enterprise policies that don't work very well leave people in welfare dependency. And so there is this view that welfare dependency is somehow a bad thing, but for somebody who really cannot work full time and doesn't really have a choice but to depend on welfare state, that really stigmatizes that group. At least in my view, it really kind of puts stigma onto. I mean, welfare state and disability. There has always been a lot of stigma around it. But we're talking here about people who are not only on benefits, they're actually people who are in work. They're working, they're trying to, achieve something in life. But they at the same time need this support in order to continue doing what they do. And so, do we need to really rethink about, we're all interconnected, we're all dependent on each other. I'm not talking here just about the welfare system. We all depend on each other. And if you're going to look at welfare dependency, if you're going to look at it negatively, what does it say about, about us as people? What does it say about society?
Also a very good point.
I'd like to ask a question, Rita, if I may.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
Eva, it's an absolute delight to see you again.
That's so lovely.
I'm delighted to see you too, Sally. It's good to be back at MMU. I feel like I'm at MMU now.
Yeah, use it often as you like in this way, because we can all talk to you together this way and give you some support. Lovely presentation. Quite sad in many ways. Not to query the findings and what people have said, but I would like to invite you to be a little bit more careful and precise about the conceptualization side. So I've always, there's three parts to this question. The first one would be a questioning of the notion of the welfare state. Welfare reform doesn't equate to the welfare state. According to the institutionalists, Keynesian welfare state was a completely different institutional form to what Bob Jessup then goes on to call the neo-Schumpeterian competition state. And I think what you're talking about is reform to employment instruments consistent with a shift from the Keynesian welfare state to neo-Schumpeterian competition state or austerity state, or all kinds of other things. That's what we're really talking about. Because none of the things you actually say, sad as they are definitely very sad, surprise anyone who's interested in those broader sweeps, institutionalist sweeps from a more protective Keynesian welfare state model, which exists much more strongly in Europe, and the austerity model, or the neo-Schumpeterian competition state, which is what we have in the UK. So I would be very careful of calling it the welfare state, because in my mind, I kind of thought, oh, we're kind of back in a protective state model, and we're definitely not. We're in a very precarious state model. That resonates really with another concern I have for the flipping between the idea of enterprise and employment or self-employment. So part of the Thatcherite discourse on enterprise in the 1980s was really get on your bike, find yourself an enterprise, be entrepreneurial, make life good for yourself. And that's very different to the notion of, let's say, a franchise business where the specificity of the business is very much pre-given by the franchise, or the issues of asking people, and then in the 1980s, our concern was with the long-term unemployed. We get them back into some form of work so that we can take them off the unemployment register. And that, I think, is the underlying rationale for moving people into some form of work. And self-employment is a form of work, and enterprise is the discourse behind it. So self-employment is a very precarious place to be for all the reasons you've said. So some of the disabled, your group of inclusive people with disabilities, they may well be entrepreneurial in the classic sense of the word. They mobilize resources from all different directions. They create enterprises. Some of them, I guarantee, are more likely to, because this was the clientele that I worked with, is long-term unemployed people, often with mental and all kinds of other issues and problems, that failing yet again in self-employment because everybody's trying to be another window cleaner on the block, for example, whatever it might be, is another signal of failure, and another signal which isn't about entrepreneurship, and it is about trying to set up a business and then that business not surviving for all kinds of reasons. I think it's very important to see the word enterprise as a discourse, and see the word employment or self-employment as an option for moving people out off the unemployment register. That is the motivation, I think, that sits behind the neo-Schumpeterian competition state, or the austerity state, or whatever. So it's that critique, really, of some of those concerns. Because I noticed in your conclusions, you did say enterprise and entrepreneurship, and then you said self-employment. So, what are the differences conceptually between them? So the third point I was going to raise was also, and I know Vicky's on, and that's really great, because we're both working with Andrew Baird, and Andrew's worked with Mike Ball for a long time on the notion of social enterprise. So obviously, not obviously, but social enterprise is interesting because it's a mixture of economic rationale and social rationale, and supportive in all kinds of different ways. And Vicky's on, so we're both big Polanyians. So this idea of characterizing place, characterizing welfare, characterizing institutions in place, we kind of resonate on that. So Andrew Baird is looking at social enterprise in maybe three places for his PhD. And I know Mike Bull has done a complete kind of a typology or a spectrum of social enterprise. And I just wonder if there is something in there that helps you, not for this paper, maybe a future paper, helps you to maybe appreciate the different forms of enterprise and entrepreneurship that may or may not be on part of a spectrum between entirely self-sufficient, entirely maybe isolated, as you said, which is all of the risks of being self-employed, precarious work, you know, and what's the other word I've got? Casualization, the whole agenda of casualization of work, which means that large employers offload parts to a very kind of casualized, precarious group of workers. And is that enterprise or is that casualization of work? So I think all of those issues kind of play into the conceptual setting up of the presentation. So I completely agree. The findings that you come to are not surprising, and they're very, very interesting and very sad. I think it's very important points and comments and findings that you come up with. But that setting up of the framing of it, I just wonder if we could maybe push that a bit harder.
Thank you, thank you, Sally. They were all excellent points, and it's something I covered more in the paper and less so in the presentation, given the space. But definitely, welfare reform and welfare state, they can be elusive terms. And my definition of, I actually use quite a loose definition of entrepreneurship and self-employment. So I define disabled entrepreneurs as self-employed or business owners with long-term impairments and health conditions. And
yes,
so
you use both in the same phrase. You use both. You say so, disabled entrepreneurs. Well, that means unpacking the word entrepreneurship. Might be self-employed, and the literature on entrepreneurship and all the kind of characteristics of entrepreneurship, of securing resources and being, they're not necessarily the same kind of characteristics as someone that has maybe inherited local grocers from a family member, where there isn't that same kind of, it's quite different, I think. So putting those two words together in the same definition, if I were reviewing that, I'd ask that to be split out.
Definitely, I agree. I need to be more careful with language. I mean, I define entrepreneurship as a new venture creation or a new combination of resources that creates value. So that's my definition that I've been always working with, and that can be created through self-employment. It can be created through entrepreneurship. It can be potentially created even by business owners who are entrepreneurial in their businesses, even if they inherit them. So I think it doesn't exclude, the definition doesn't exclude self-employed or business owners from the definition of entrepreneur, but I've got a very low threshold of what I consider to be new and innovative or new value. So I think we need to recognize as well, what is innovative or new for one person may not be innovative and new for another person, but or the other way around. What you may not find very innovative and entrepreneurial may be very new and innovative for somebody else.
Yes, yeah. Conceptually, I think we're more in the kind of landscape of Venn diagrams, because what you're discussing is kind of some overlaps and some separation. So entrepreneurship and employment, where do they kind of overlap and where are they quite different?
Yeah. Because we still have Jorge to present, and I think some of us are going to a meeting at 4 p.m. Very, very interesting discussion, very interesting presentation, Eva, very interesting discussion between you and Sally, and I hope this has given some inspiration. And now we've got Jorge. I think I can see Jorge already.
Before I start, something to Eva, not a question, because I know I'm conscious with the time. Eva, you have a question from Paul, if you see the chat box.
Yes,
point.
yes.
Yeah,
Paul,
I wanted to say something about the conceptual issues, because I'm conscious we're in the UK and it's not a very inclusive society or country, although in speeches we use it. Something we've been using in Latin America, even the wording, disable. You know, I would be very careful because it's already bringing a negative perception. I've been working for more than 10 years with the Manchester Deaf Center, and we've been trying to push in the English language the term differently able, not disabled, because we all have different disability, if that was the case. That's why with the Manchester Deaf Center, by incorporating my Latin American experience, we tend to change, not using disabled, but differently able people. Because you mentioned, for instance, minorities, you mentioned single moms. We are all differently able to an extent. So, you know, just, you know, an addition to the conceptual issue, because I think it's important. And I really like your presentation, by the way.
Thank you, Jorge. That's a really good question. And I know it's, you know, you got your presentation, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I actually recently had a conversation with a colleague, because an editor for a book chapter where we want to submit kind of challenged us and said, can you use the concept, can you use people with disabilities rather than disabled people? And my own view on it is that there is no right or wrong, it's a matter of preference. So in America, I know in Latin America and in America generally, people prefer people with disabilities. And I have myself used differently abled rather than disabled in my written work. But I think, you know, I prefer to use disabled people because many people who I have interviewed told me that they prefer that, coming from the social model of disability which originated in the UK. And I try to normally distinguish between disabled people and people with long-term impairments and health conditions, to recognize that there are many people who have long-term conditions who don't necessarily self-identify as disabled. And then there are many disabled people who don't see that the problem is in their impairment or health condition, but that it's the society that disables them. So that's my logic for using the words like that. But I recognize and completely understand when many disabled people want to talk about themselves more as people with disabilities rather than disabled people. So I think there is no right and wrong. It's a matter of preference.
Correct. Yes, completely agree with that. Thank you for that, Eva.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Paul's question was, did you see this, Eva?
Yes,
this
Paul,
issue in, yeah.
Paul, I think excellent question. It kind of touches on the idea. I think some of my participants mentioned the idea of basic income, and I think this would be, and I think some of them even campaign for that. And I think it's particularly important for people who have fluctuating health conditions, whose income fluctuates. I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm not an economist, but I'm really interested in the idea of basic income, and I think it would probably. I also know that there is. I think that there are many disabled people who disagree with the idea of basic income because they worry that if we have basic income, then there would be less money for people who have the severest of disabilities. And so, even within disability movement, there are disagreements on the topic.
Okay, thanks for this, Eva. That was very, very, very interesting. Jorge,
I'm ready.
You're ready? Cool. Okay.
Let me move this because I have so many screens on.
Oh my God.
Yeah, what I'm going to try to do very briefly, I came up with a book this year, so the kind of methodology I'm going to explain is the one I use, with my book. And ideally, I'm already working on the third step to try to bring global answers to global issues such as territorial disputes. I'm using that one because, again, I've been researching territorial disputes for more than 10 years. But the kind of methodology could be applied to terrorism, COVID, and so on. These are my details, and I think I know many of you, but in any case, I'm happy to share. The situation right now, exactly what we had with Eva or Amparo before, or even with Rita, I use this metaphor coming from India, this story of 6 blind men for the very first time coming to an elephant. And I use on purpose, intentionally these names: Boris, the journalist; Vladimir, the military man; Donald, the businessman, and so on. What I'm trying to say here, depending on who we are or depending on our science of disciplines, it may be that we define our reality because of our preconceptions. And although we claim to be scientists and we claim to be neutral, we are not. And that's why I'm using this metaphor. I don't know if you know the story, the Indian story of these 6 blind men. They start touching the elephant. One of them may touch the leg, and this person may think, oh, the elephant feels like a big column. Somebody else may touch the skin, and somebody else may disagree and say, no, this is not a column. This feels like a wall. And somebody else, again, being blind, may touch the trunk and may think it's not a wall, it's not a column, it feels like a rope, and so on. And I think that's exactly what we do in science nowadays. We tend to have a unidimensional view. Although we talk about multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary studies, and again, territorial disputes is the best example, we tend to talk about Gibraltar, Kashmir, Tibet, Falkland, Malvinas from a lawyer's perspective, a political science perspective, a Spanish perspective, a British perspective, but we don't combine them. So what I'm trying to do, it's not reinventing the wheel. I don't think we need new concepts. I think simply we need to start shifting our view. We are more complex than being a lawyer or being a political scientist or being British or being Argentinian. We are richer than that. That's why my comment to Eva about disabled or differently able. I think we are much more than that. And that has to do with Rita's presentation before. So my way of approaching whatever I study, again, in my case, my research, territorial disputes, I start with the law. There are rules, but these rules are applicable to certain facts. And the way in which these two work together has to do with my own value judgment, the axiological. And I'll explain later what I mean by that by using some examples. The steps I've already taken, my 2017 book, I try to put a solution to territorial disputes. This is my 2017 book, by asking myself what reasonable people would do with a dispute such as Kashmir or Gibraltar or Falklands, Malvinas Islands. And I asked these ideal people, reasonable people, to choose representatives. These representatives did not know who they represented, and then they had to come up with a solution no reasonable party could reject. Again, that was the first step. The second step, and here we have a bit of what I did. I'm not going to go into detail, again, because I'm conscious of the time today. I came up with one of many possible solutions. The second step, 2020, published this year, has to do with bringing that theory from 2017 into case studies. And to me, what was more important is to review different sciences. I took 3 in particular: international relations, law, and political science, and tried to prove a point. Those would have been my conceptual chapters from 1 to 5. Very, very classical elements such as state or sovereignty, how very different disciplines define them in a very different fashion. Why I was trying to do that? Because I'm trying to offer a global view by using different disciplines, try to come up with conceptual coherence, and then to try to offer guidelines for resolution. And I think that's what we are missing right now. We tend to assume we talk about the same issues. We tend to assume we talk using the same concepts, whether the discipline, whether the country of reference. However, in reality, we depart from different assumptions and different conceptions. Because of our departure are different, the results are different. We cannot come to an agreement in terms of Jerusalem, in terms of Kashmir, in terms of any of the issues. And again, COVID is the latest example. We have so random results because we have so random policies because we don't agree in the way we approach these global issues. And again, my chapters are simply an analysis of what we have nowadays. I'm not reinventing any wheel. I try to show very, very easy concepts such as the state, defined by public international law, the Montevideo Convention back in the 1930s, a population in a territory with a certain government. If we take law as the point of reference, we will have one kind of characterization. If we go to political sciences, we'll have another kind of focus. All legal definitions will focus on one element, territory. That is why we talk about territorial sovereignty in law. When we go to political sciences, the same concept, they focus mainly on people and government. And that is why I'm showing you very simplistically here how the theories are very different from law to political sciences. And we may see that we have interdisciplinary congresses. This is evident when we have these kind of events, and we cannot agree. We cannot agree because we assume that we speak the same language, when in reality we depart from different assumptions. The same I'm telling you about state, I did with sovereignty, and to me this is very interesting coming from Latin America and living in the UK. And I'm going to take a minute here. The classical concept of sovereignty has to do with an absolute highest power within a territory that is able to create and apply the law for the people, for that particular state. The issue here, and that's why law combined with facts, the issue here in public international law, there is a principle called equal sovereignty. So the US is as equal as the UK, and the UK is as equal as Brazil. That is the law. In reality, we know some states are more equal than others, and that has implications. That is the factual side of my analysis. And that is why, I mean, neocolonialism, colonialism, historically, the UK usually sees Spain, France, and the US as equal, being sovereign. So they are absolute equal sovereigns. However, the rest of the states internationally seem to be lower. Yeah? In a lower, although in law, we seem to be equal, the United Nations Charter, in reality, we are not. That is why most of the decisions in terms of climate change come from central capitals, not all. That is why territorial disputes are not being resolved, because the solution comes from the top to the bottom and so on. To me, the guilty parties are not these concepts, because both state and sovereignty offer us two choices. Domination, exactly what we've been doing so far in some Western states mainly, and cooperation. We have in law the chance to work together. The concept of state and the concept of sovereignty enable any state to work together with other states. I mean, international agreements are just an example. And I've used many examples here, but the fact that we see Russia invading, between inverted commas, Crimea, would have been different if the UK took over a place in Africa. Why? It has to do with who is a central actor in international relations and who is not. And I'm not trying to blame any party or not. I'm simply describing a situation, not assessing a situation. Exactly the same procedure I follow with another key concept. For me, territorial disputes. We could do the same with terrorism, COVID, trafficking, and so on. This kind of multi-dimensional analysis, not only in law, but law, political sciences, and international relations. And what I wanted to show, this is my chapter 5. We do have many remedies and procedures added to the institutions, regionally and internationally, to deal with territorial disputes. Most of them do not work, and when they do, they work in very few cases. It's not surprising that most of our disputes are still going on, and they will go on for many decades. Again, Jerusalem is probably the most obvious one. There are other issues in Middle East, in Asia, the South China Sea, and more than 7 countries, not only the 7 countries we tend to see on the news. Issues with indigenous population all over the world, and so on. We do have the remedies, we do have the institutions, we do have the procedures, they are simply not working. And there is a reason for that, this lack of multidimensional analysis. Next chapters 6, 7, and 8, I deal with different components. So some of them focusing on the Americas, I show the historical element and I show the socio-legal element. So on the one hand, we have certain European states, the UK, mainly England at the time, and the British Empire, Spain, Portugal, and France, taking over the Americas. There is still presence, and that presence has caused issues in terms of the Americas within, the classical example nowadays, the border between Mexico and the US, and another one, indigenous rights. Some of our populations in the Americas are not accepted legally as persons. Of course, in a biological, anthropological sense, they are people. But legally, which is a completely different concept, legally, they are not persons, unless they are recognized at the level of the national constitution. What I was trying to show in this chapter, and the rest I'm going to talk very briefly about, there are historical components. However, this is not enough to explain territorial disputes. There are socio-legal components, there are political components as well. Ruling parties and political leaders tend to use these issues, territorial disputes, to gain momentum within their jurisdictions. So in most cases, and there is empirical research as well here, in most cases, these leaders intend to continue with this territorial dispute. They would not want the territorial disputes to be solved simply because it enables them to stay longer in power. Again, I took a bit longer for the Americas, but the same analysis in Europe and Asia. I used 4 case studies in Europe: Crimea, Gibraltar, Cyprus, and Northern Ireland. I focus, instead of the history here, I focus on, again, society and how issues, let's say Northern Ireland, that seem to be resolved, still present problems in terms of their societies. And nowadays with Brexit, even more. I talk about as well Brexit in my book. Asia, 2 cases. And very briefly, Africa, very similar to Latin America. The historical component is very important. However, it's not enough to explain why these territorial disputes are still going on between states and intra-states, because territorial disputes have to do as well with how natural resources are used, how people are being manipulated, and it has to do as well with migration and forced migrations. So again, more complex than simply setting a border. What I'm trying to show, again, is not a complaint or anything against the US or the UK or France or any other central country. The reality, we are simply shifting one understanding and changing to make it a bit more politically correct. However, the reason is still the same, because we are being so narrow-minded in the way certain leaders and our disciplines are working, that we are still using the same kind of platform in order to review and to assess this situation that it was used before at the time of the colonial empires. To me, some of the conclusions I get, history, it's relevant, however, it's not enough to explain these issues. There are components that have to do with religion and ethnicity, but we have to distinguish them from history. And again, I'm simply mentioning some of the conclusions. We have to distinguish socio-legal components, historical components, financial components, and so on. And we need to assess them. Same with the context. We may pay attention to the domestic, we may pay attention to the international. We need to pay attention to all of them, to a lesser degree or to give them more relevance. However, all three contexts, the domestic, the regional, and the international, should be taken into account if we want to assess properly these situations. Territorial conflicts, and again, any global issue is multi-level in the sense it has to do with different contexts, different people, different times, different histories, and so on. That is why one of the things I mentioned, I disagree with Pogge and many others. Pogge is very well known. He's a professor at Yale, and he's been working on global justice for many, many years. He's the leading academic worldwide in terms of global justice. I met him a few times, and I disagree with him in the sense, looking for guilty party. It is fine to know where the problem started. I don't agree with him in the sense we need to do something with these guilty parties, between inverted commas. I think it's time to know where it started and start working on solutions by simply, like he says here, reaching out and try to find our ancestors, since it's not enough in order to solve these issues. To me, once again, we have to be conscious. We have the legislation, we have remedies at the local level, at the regional level, and the international level to tackle these issues. Same with COVID. However, in fact, we are not using them properly. And that has to do not with the norms, not with the fact, but with the assessments we do. Our leaders and us as scientists as well. To me, there is a lack, again, of collaboration. And if this condition exists, I'm a positive thinker. However, I'm a realist as well, in the sense, if we don't change our mindset in the way we approach these issues, these territorial disputes will continue. One of the things I can share, again, because it's a complete book, but one of the things I can share, if we want to solve them, parties alien to the dispute should not interfere, not even United Nations, because United Nations, for many reasons I address in the book, is a non-democratic institution. And we can see that clearly at the Assembly, the General Assembly, or the Security Council. That is why, although and the next step I'm going to take, I'm already working on the third book, the third step. I think COVID, for many, it's a problem for all of us. It's a problem, but I think it's as well a blessing in disguise. We have a unique time in history right now. We can either start building something new by using what we have, or take a U-turn. Right now, I see our leaders and our scientists going backwards. I don't see any novelty. Although we claim to be living through a new modernity, I see, like using Rita's, I see very little heart, very little hands, too much brain. And the brain has to do with our ego. That's why I use, usually in all my presentations, a sample of Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam, just to show, regardless of our differences, culturally or in terms of religion, simply having the speech is not enough. Simply having the idea is not enough. I think it's up to each of us, not our leaders. Our leaders are not giving us the answers. It's up to each of us to do our best to bring a solution. And I'm going to finish, Rita, 2 more minutes and I'm done. With a quote from an Argentinian author. I think when we have, paraphrasing him, people from diverse tribes, different ethnicities, religions, and so on. As I said before, we have two options: dominate each other or cooperate. He says here, focus on our differences or our affinities. I think as humankind, we've been focusing too long on our differences. I think it's high time to start working together and thinking of our affinities. And I think this event is an example. We met with Rita early this year, and luckily we've been working together for several months now. It's about inclusion, not exclusion. It's about mutual respect. And coming back to Eva, I see the point you make about disabled people calling themselves disability. That has been embedded in their minds. Because I've been lucky to work with differently able people for many years, I know they've been educated to use that language as well. To me, and I'm going to sort of finish here, to me the key has to do with leaving behind this cartoon here. I don't know if you're familiar with Star Trek. It's a metaphor of the Borg. The Borg, to me, has to do with what we've been seeing with the British Empire, and nowadays, what Britain is doing all around the world, France, the US, and some other countries. They define inclusion by, what I understand, assimilating others. I can accept you only if you behave like me, if you dress like me, if you have my same accent, if you believe in the things I believe in. That is not inclusion, that is assimilation. Inclusion, the way we see it in Latin America, and I put the Pope here intentionally because the story says the Pope learned this sign from someone in the Philippines. That is wrong. The Pope learned that sign from that lady here, blonde hair, from Brazil. She's the founder of the foundation I represent in Brazil. Her name is Shusha, and the sign, usually people see in sign language, I love you. It doesn't mean I love you. It means I accept you the way you are. And that is inclusion for me. I accept you the way you are, regardless of your ethnicity, your origin, your accent, the way you dress, or the God you believe in. That is inclusion to me, not assimilating others, not asking others to behave like me, but simply accepting them the way they are. That's probably a personal message that comes with my research. And to finish off, again, Rita mentioned this before, we have a group, and again, my work is an example of the things I'm trying to do with inclusion. It's called Juris North. We meet at least once a month, and we have scientists from different disciplines and from all across the world trying to discuss solutions from our own research to problems like COVID, terrorism, and so on. You're more than welcome to join us whenever you want. So to finish, one last sentence. My take on global issues. We need to think globally, but we need as well to act locally. We need the know-how from local people, organizations like this one. So by bringing international law down, we can actually help these people all over the world to bring their knowledge as well. That is why one view is not enough, what I call unidimensional view, whether it's coming from a discipline or only from our mind. Again, using Rita's example about mind, heart, and hands. It has to do with collaboration, what I dare to claim multidimensional view. Again, it's a bit more complex than that. I'm already working on the third step, my third book, but I wanted just to show with territorial disputes what I mean by multidimensional. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. This was a really, really interesting presentation with a lot of ideas. I have to say, a lot of ideas, amazing. And I remember our conversation a couple of months ago about inclusion versus assimilation, and this distinction that's being made in Latin America, no? As you explained, and I accept you the way you are. This idea, I was absolutely impressed, and I'm just checking here. I mean, Eva is saying fascinating presentation, Jorge.
Thank you, Eva.
Can I? I guess it's not that many of us, so we could
Yeah.
just chat without being muted. But I thank you so much, Jorge. I was really looking forward to having a. I think, you know, like I've always thought about the conflict, but this is the first presentation I have ever heard, academic presentation about this topic, and it was really interesting. And Rita, sorry, can I ask a question? Or?
Yeah, please go ahead. I don't think there's only a couple of people left here, and so please speak up. It's nice to have faces.
Yeah, let's have a chat.
Jorge, when you talk about the multidimensional approach and how many people just use this unidimensional approach, are you talking here about your, that graph that you had, the facts, values, and norms? Or what do you mean by this multidimensional approach?
Yeah, it's more, thank you for that, Eva. No, this is the start. My next step, I call it pluralism of pluralisms. What do I mean? In parallel, I'm going to start working on different contexts. So the local, the regional, and then the international. And in terms of people, and again, it has many levels, and I'm not talking, it has a vertical view and a horizontal view. Yeah. In terms of people, I'm going to talk about the individual, communities, and states. I'm putting the Falklands to put an example. Yeah. We may think about the UK and Argentina. That's not enough. That's not enough because even within the UK and within Argentina, we have different people aiming for something different for the Falklands. We have the Falkland Islanders and so on, or Jerusalem. We tend to see on the news Palestine, Israel. That's not enough. We have Palestine, we have Israel, we have diaspora, we have settlers, and many other individuals, communities, and states. That's what I mean. And again, it's much more complex even than this book. That's why I'm already working on the next step, because it has to do with context, with people. Again, people. I'm talking about individuals, I'm talking about communities and states. As well, agents. Like I'm going to use the metaphor here, a board game. Yeah, we have the host, let's say Rita and I. Yes, then we may have participants, and then we may have attendees. So different levels without degrees. I'm not talking about degrees here. I'm talking about interaction. So suppose Falklands, we have the UK and Argentina being the host. The Falkland Islanders may be participants for the UK, but for Argentina, they are mere attendees. They don't have any right to do anything. Do you see? So again, coming back to you, I only mentioned today bullet points. In reality, what I'm trying to aim is not, fact, norm, and the axiological choice. That's simply put today. I'm talking about pluralism of pluralisms.
And
again, it's longer.
It's really interesting, and I'll look up your work and read more about it.
Paul has also got a question. Jorge, I'm wondering how your discipline reacts to your interdisciplinarity. That's a nice one. Oh, yeah.
I think too, people love it, people hate it. Yeah, and that's why I'm here. I mean, this is my own philosophy. I share this with Rita, and we are very few. I don't mind being recorded. When I was 4 or 5, I had something similar to leukemia, and I'm still here. I had every issue. I mean, so far I haven't had COVID. Yeah, but I believe if we are here to make this world a bit better than we came. So whether some people agree or disagree, well, that's science. I've been taught when I was, primary, secondary, and university, that you are supposed to share knowledge. And if you are wrong, that's the way you grow. Yes. And I don't mind to, being criticized or being improved. Like Eva, we had a conversation about disability, different able. So I'm learning from her, she's learning from me. That is science to me. Whether she's a lawyer, whether she's from China, or whether she's from Brazil and she's a political scientist, if she or he dares to tell me I'm wrong, just show me and show me how to improve. So I had both, luckily, I have to say, people very in tune with what I say, people who hate what I say. And that's what I'm here, to try to add whatever I can add. I'm not telling you I have the truth. No, same with, and I'll finish with this, Paul. 2017, I'm giving one solution. And I said in all my presentations, to me, it's not important my solution. To me, what's important is procedural justice. I'm providing a platform for all to discuss on equal basis. That's the bare minimum I claim. Equal basis, whether you are a lawyer from Argentina or a political science from China, or an anthropologist from the UK, yes? Or whether you don't have any discipline at all. That's what the bare minimum I ask. And then these people should come up with their solution. I offer my solution. By no means, I'm telling you, this is the solution. Thank you, Paul.
Can I ask?
Okay, I often wonder about, yeah, go on, sorry.
No, go, Paul. You haven't said it.
Go on, Paul.
Yeah, go speak. Go on.
I just wonder about whether you publish books, because it's harder to publish controversial perspectives in journals.
No, I think I find them, I feel very, I publish as well journal articles. You can, and I publish myself. I love writing anyway. I have a blog in Spanish and I have a blog in English as well. To me, education should be free. I'm completely against the British model, not because I'm a communist, because I was brought up with public state education. All my studies have been for free until I came here. I love the UK, you know, and the educational system and the level we have here. However, I think there should be something else. So whatever I publish, I try somehow to dilute it and to put it for free online. Yeah, that's one thing. And it's not, it's simply because I am a prolific writer. And to me, I feel constricted. It's a personal choice. I feel constricted. So if I want to elaborate, to me, I'm experimenting. So if I want to elaborate, I've discovered, I'm using the book I'm working on already, the third step. Originally, it was going to be an article. When I started writing the article, I felt this is too short. So the article became a book proposal, and it's already a book proposal.
Yeah, we can all empathize with that. Ava, please.
I was interested in you know, what was behind your question, Paul. You know, why you think that interdisciplinarity would be viewed negatively by, you know, I mean, there's lots of call for people to use interdisciplinary research these days. It's kind of encouraged, at least from, you know, my understanding, it's encouraged that people use interdisciplinary research. Is it different in your discipline? Or?
Yes, I mean, the elite journals in business and management are quite disciplinary.
In law as well, that's why I may target my articles. But again, I came to a realization probably this year, because the second book started as a blog. You know, the second book, this is a result of my blog. Of course, then I took a few months to polish whatever I had published, you know, as a blog. But the third one, honestly, started 2-3 months ago. I was going to write an article and said, this is not enough. So I'm pleasing myself now. I'm pleasing myself, or yes, I need, we all need, because we are in the UK, ref and so on, to publish in. So legal academic articles or in political sciences, I will have to be more specific, more targeted. Yeah, but yeah, it wouldn't be me. So yes, I have to comply with, I'm a lawyer, you know, with whatever they ask me to do for ref. But you know, my experimental side, I need to be able to be writing more freely. Nothing to do with them, because if not, I'm putting the blame on them, and I'm not that kind of, you know, so I own it. It's my style. I prefer books.
Yeah, well, it is just, yes, Eva?
Rita, I know we've kind of gone over time, but I also had some questions for you, because
yeah, that's okay.
Time to talk about your presentation.
No worries.
I missed the beginning of your presentation when you talk about hands, heart, and head.
Head, hands, and heart.
What did you find? What did you find in your research? Was there too little of hearts in in students in the way they were learning, or and what's your suggestion for how can we develop entrepreneurship education then using this framework?
Okay. Maybe I can share a screen. Maybe I can do that. Yeah. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, actually, what I talked about today, you know, on the 8th of July, when I had this event on about sustainable enterprise education, where Jorge was also part of, I basically, apart from 2 academic panels, I had a practitioner panel where basically I had SMEs, startups, postgraduate learners, and academics. And I'd given them a couple of questions. So I'd introduced this model, this one, Head, Hands, and Heart, which is from Sipos, et al. And I basically asked the participants to reflect, what should we actually teach in the head category? What should we teach in the hands? What should we include in the heart? If we are teaching at the crossroads of enterprise and sustainability. And the idea was actually basically to then emerge with something like this, which basically, was the result of the reflections of practitioners from industry, the learners, they are practitioners as well, and then the academics. So that was actually, I mean, I wanted to report back to the participants of our workshop here today about what people were saying, what we should actually bring into education. And because, I mean, a lot of people will probably agree with what is on the screen. The problem is, it's a bit like what Jorge is saying, we've got narrow-minded leaders. I noticed from Jorge's presentation today. And the narrow-minded leaders, they have a certain vision of what things should be like. And they also have a certain vision about education. And one of my colleagues here, actually, Sam, also asked me, like, how are we going to put these ideas which are here on screen into practice? Is basically we're facing big issues that the institutional frameworks, are not supportive of the idea of sustainable enterprise, for instance, or sustainable entrepreneurship, or the whole sustainability debate, you know. So he basically, just to quote Sam, how do we reconcile the fact that we're teaching sustainability in schools and we have institutions, brackets politicians, who do not believe in this concept as we do, or in the way it is being approached, and are instead advocating the contrary. So basically, Eva, I've said a lot now, but the idea is I wanted to feedback from these different multiple perspectives, sort of views on what education should be like, because like Jorge, I feel somehow there is some change needed. And I mean, even actually, Eva, you seem to suggest that as well, feeding back from your entrepreneurial people. Yeah, I mean,
Jorge seems to suggest that in his presentation, but I think it probably goes back to the heart of science being, and this kind of distinction between value and fact, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
The sciences are too much fact focused and don't, I mean, I just think about the whole engaged scholarship, and how sciences have changed over the past 10 years in the UK, for instance. We're more encouraged to be engaged scholars and to try to make difference to the community and to build relationships and engage with the values. Whereas when I was starting my PhD, this is just 10 years ago, my supervisors told me, you should be an objective researcher who produces knowledge, and you've got nothing to do with policy making or making any changes. It's not your job. And, that's why people come to universities, because they produce independent, value-free knowledge. And I think that's changing completely now, isn't it?
To me, I think it has to do with the change in mindset, probably because it's been my mindset. I mean, to me, my degree, I mean, I have several degrees, and my degrees have been always a means to an end, because I've always wanted to make a change. So to me, my law degree, it's a license to make that change. Do you see what I mean? Or now I moved to this country intentionally because I didn't know if I wanted to publish this, no one would have read it in Spanish in Argentina globally. So I needed one of two countries, the US or the UK. So it has a practical reason why I'm in this country. Again, whether you want to, and that's what I think it's beautiful in our nature, whether you want to limit yourself and think of yourself as only a lawyer or only British, no, I think we are much more than that. I think it has to do with us and being lucky to have, because of our effort and so on, to have the capacity, to be in a country like this one, very central to law and policy, locally, regionally, and globally, that somehow we have that responsibility to bring the change. And something minute, I mentioned to Paul when he presented for Juris North his research and his book, published by Routledge. They are very expensive. And I said to him, well, you have an option as well. You can send very minute, but the royalties, and that's what I do with my books. I send my royalties to the foundation in Brazil. I'm not going to get any richer, and it's not a massive contribution. However, it's my way of using my position in the UK to pay back to Latin America. I think it has to do again with us and owning the reality. We have a choice to keep on adding lines to our CV, which is fine, I'm not saying it's wrong, or to use our positions, whether in the UK, China, Argentina, to try to bring that change. And to me, the answer is very clear. I have only one life, I better use it.
My book's in paperback now.
Ah, very good. Very good. Congratulations, Paul.
I think it's now affordable.
That's nice. And I still haven't written my book, even though students have asked me to write this book about innovative learning, sort of innovative pedagogy. I still haven't. I find it amazing how you write these books. It's fantastic. I really admire that. But I also I agree with two things you just said. Number one, bring the change, right? And own the reality. Because I mean, we are also a little bit, by our leaders, maybe a little bit challenged to own the reality. Yeah. And Eva already suggested that there are growing constraints somehow on us as academics. But it is also about, yes, bringing the change, because I mean, in particular with COVID, I also find when I teach a research methods class, I've got young men wanting to research the gender gap. They are interested why the women earn less across the board, So it's actually the young men. I mean, they're interested in these topics that affect the women. And I find this is important because this is the young generation. They want to change. We are the academics in front of them. We are, in a way, I find almost responsible for actually helping them to move society. But it is pretty hard, I find. But I find it encouraging that they come with it. So,
yeah,
Eva, yeah.
I agree with everything you said about, we are, in a way, what Jorge said, we are in the position of power. How can we use it for better, to make the world better, idealistic. But I also, I started training yesterday on engaged scholarship, and it was delivered by business consultants, basically telling academics how they should engage more with business. And all I could think about the whole time was the big society and how the government wants academics to engage with businesses and to show impact, and and civil society to volunteer and do things that public sector was doing previously. And I just thought, like, yes, I agree with the idea of, in principle, of engaged scholarship. Yes, we should do more, not just produce research. We should apply our research and change the world. But some of it is the role of the government. And are we supposed to, I mean, if I look at early career researchers, we are pushed to publish, we are pushed to show impact, we are pushed to apply for funding, and it's exhausting. And I just feel like, is this government just pushing people to do all the work unpaid over the weekends and in the evenings when,
My answer, Eva, if I may, because I come from Latin America and I know what, if you wait for your government, you will not get any result. And I'm not against Boris Johnson, by the way, or Donald Trump. I think it is a waste of energy, you know, to complain about governments or leaders. To me, it has to do with what is your purpose. And I'm not here using wishful thinking. I'm talking here as a human being rather than a lawyer or living in the UK or so on. And whether institutionally, my institution has not helped my career very much. And I'm more than happy to say that, and I'm more than happy to be recorded. I had to fight for my place, and I had to fight for, you know, to build up a discussion group and so on. Has it been easy? No, never. They pay me a salary and so on. But yeah, Rita, just a second, but I think what I'm trying to say, grateful to the British government because I'm getting paid. Grateful to the British people because, you know, I'm having a platform here in a country I'm not a national of. Grateful to my employer because, luckily or not, they've given me the place to do, you know, what I'm doing. So I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think I've been open to have both, coming back to Paul as well, positive and negative feedback. If you want to change something, you will get both. Try to learn the lesson from both of them and try to appreciate both. Because I have negative feedback or negative impact that has enabled me to push forward. So thanks to something that didn't work properly, it is now that we are able to have an independent group, which is part of this institution as well. Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, they won't give us the answer. Bless them, bless their families. But I think